Hello, and welcome to the recording of our March 27th 4-H at 4 about physics and Rube Goldberg machines. I'm Matthew Olson, 4-H agent in Clay County, Florida, and I'm so glad that you're viewing this presentation and taking in the information. Here in 4-H, we empower youth with the skills to lead for a lifetime through research-backed, fun, hands-on activities in areas like science, health, agriculture, and civic engagement, all with the support of a caring adult mentor. In Florida, 4-H is brought to you by the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agriculture Science Cooperative Extension. If you're outside of Florida, I have good news for you. 4-H is available in every state in the United States through your land-grant institution, meaning that it is delivered to every community throughout the country. To find out more information about your 4-H program, you can visit 4-h.org and put in information about where you live to get directed to your local program. Now, when we presented this, I was joined by Beth Kerr, who is a 4-H agent in Hamilton County, Florida, and we will join in to the presentation as it was in progress. Enjoy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, what is a Rube Goldberg machine? According to our definition, it's a complex machine that uses a chain reaction to accomplish a simple task. So we're going to break that down a little bit. A complex machine. Well, a machine is going to be a mechanically operated device that performs a task or does work. When the definition says chain reaction, we're talking about a step-by-step series of events where one step leads to the next, which leads to the next, and accomplishing a simple task. You today are going to get to vote on what simple task we're going to elect to do for our Rube Goldberg projects. Now, if everyone will look at the slide right there in the center, I've drawn a little sketch of a table. And on top of the table is a cardboard box with dominoes on top of the box. In this little simple Rube Goldberg machine, the dominoes are going to fall one at a time until one falls off the box and hits that ball. The ball will then roll forward and nudge the box that's hanging just on the edge of the table to fall off, hit the mouse trap that's sitting on the floor, and when that spring is sprung, it's going to pull that truck forward. So in this particular Rube Goldberg contraption, my simple task is to move a toy truck forward. And it's actually a complicated machine. Instead of just pushing the truck, I devised a step-by-step process that took 4 steps just to move that truck. Now, you may be wondering, why do we call it Rube Goldberg? Why not just call it a contraption? Well, that has to do with the man himself. Rube Goldberg was a real live man who actually was born on July 4th in 1883. He loved art and loved drawing, but when it came time to pick a career, he chose engineering. Rube Goldberg was an engineer, an inventor, and a cartoonist. When he started drawing these elaborate cartoons and sending them to the newspapers in New York, they loved it. And pretty soon he gave up being an engineer and strictly drew cartoons for his living. His cartoons were featured in hundreds of newspapers across the country. One other thing I want to tell you about Rube Goldberg, especially for our adults listening that may remember the movie or may have watched it, he actually also wrote a movie script in 1931 called Soup to Nuts. And in this movie script was the first appearance of what we have come to know as the Three Stooges. Next slide, Matt. Okay, in your Rube Goldberg projects, you're going to have lots of energy. The first type of energy we're going to introduce you to today is potential energy. Potential energy is stored energy because of position. So there's 3 types of potential energy. And on this slide, you can see there's a ball perched on a hill, there's some rubber bands, and there's a battery. The 3 types of potential energy that you might include in your Rube Gold project will be gravitational energy. Potential energy, and that's represented by the ball on the hill. Gravitational potential energy is energy that's stored and is dependent on the object's weight and the height above the Earth's surface. Elastic potential energy is energy that is also stored because of something that's compressed or stretched, and a really good example is a rubber band. If I have this little rubber band and I stretch it, I'm actually stretching it, and when I hold it, it has stored energy. If I let go, that energy is transformed into energy in motion, which Matt will tell us about in a few minutes. And then the third type of potential energy is chemical potential energy. And that's going to be represented today by a battery. Oftentimes you have toys and we have things around our house that require the use of batteries. And as long as that button is in the off position, all that energy is stored inside the battery. As soon as we turn that battery on, we can use our toy and the wheels will start spinning, the flashlight will turn on, and it takes that stored energy and transfers it to energy at work. Now Matt is going to tell you all about kinetic energy.
All right, I just had to make sure I had everything set for my presentation real quick. So with kinetic energy, it is a different type of energy that we will find almost in our everyday lives. Now, in order for an object to have what we call kinetic energy, it has to have movement. And along with movement, it has to have mass. So that means it is something that is either the size of an electron or a proton, all the way up to ourselves and even bigger things like our entire planet. It has kinetic energy because it has mass and it is moving. And so that creates what we call kinetic energy. Now, what I'd like you to do is take about 30 seconds, type down in the chat box to Miss Grace Carter of if you can think of anything in our everyday lives that has kinetic energy. And we'll give you about 30 seconds and then I'll ask Miss Grace to pipe in with some of your feedback and what your thoughts are on what might have kinetic energy in our everyday lives.
Okay, so I'm seeing Becky says cars.
We'll give probably about 5-6 more seconds. Any other thoughts out there of what might have kinetic energy? Well, that's a perfect example, actually. Cars, anything that's moving have kinetic energy. So it takes energy to get it moving, but once it's moving, it still has energy in that kinetic energy form. So as you can see with my little Bitmoji, as he moved in, that car had kinetic energy as it was moving. So now I'd like to do a little bit of a thought here. And let's see if we can figure out what object or mode of transportation I have here on the screen would have kinetic energy, or which has the most kinetic energy. So I want you to remember that kinetic energy is a function of mass and velocity, and that as mass increases, so does kinetic energy, and as velocity increases, so does kinetic energy. So what I have here is a train, which has a mass of 200 kilograms moving at 25 miles an hour. And then we have a car, which has a mass of 100 kilograms moving at 25 miles an hour. Now, luckily, we shouldn't need to do very much math to decide which one has more kinetic energy. And I'd like, again, for you to give your thoughts to Miss Grace Carter in the chat as to which one of these two has more kinetic energy. So I'll give you about 10 to 15 seconds. Let's get those responses in and see what we have. All right, so I got a private message that said the train has more kinetic energy. Were there any other thoughts out there?
I'm hearing train, I'm hearing car.
Okay, so we're hearing both. So actually, in this example, we know both of them are moving at 25 miles an hour. So that's really not a factor. What is a factor is the mass of those modes of transportation. And with the train coming in at 200 kilograms and the car coming in at 100 kilograms, the train actually has more kinetic energy because it's bigger, even though it's moving at the same speed as the car. So when you have a bigger object moving at the same speed as a smaller object, the bigger object will have more kinetic energy. So it has more ability to do something. So now I believe we're moving on next to mechanical energy and Miss Beth.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about potential energy and Kinetic energy. So what is mechanical energy? Well, mechanical energy is the energy due to both the position and the motion of an object. So mechanical energy is the sum of both the kinetic and the potential energy. In the cartoon here on the front, you see the car. That's your energy in motion, your kinetic energy, and the green ball perched on the slope, that would have potential energy as long as it's sitting right there on top of that slope. When that ball starts to move, it's going to develop some kinetic energy as it moves down the slope. So mechanical energy is kinetic energy plus potential energy, and it's the ability to do work. So your Rube Goldberg projects are going to accomplish a simple task, but all the way through each chain reaction, each step, there's going to be energy that's creating work, doing work as it moves from task to task. So mechanical energy enables a body or an object to do work, and it has force and velocity with kinetic energy, and it has stored energy with potential. Okay, Matt's going to talk to us about energy transfer. How do we go from potential energy to kinetic energy?
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint real quick so that hopefully you can see my screen, my video full screen. I had to get closer to my laptop real quick to be able to do that. So hopefully you see me standing here in my kitchen with a couple different items. So the first one that I want to draw your attention to is this thing called a Newton's cradle. Now, as we talked about potential and kinetic energy, this is a good demonstration of that, as well as energy transfer. So if I were to get this billiard ball and pull it back here, that is increasing the height of this billiard ball relative to where it started. And as I release it, it'll start to swing back and it will increase in its kinetic energy. So as the kinetic energy is increasing, the potential energy is decreasing because it has the same amount of energy regardless of whether it was at when it always has the same amount of energy. So what we'll do here is we'll pull this one back, let it go, and see what happens. As you can see, it transferred the energy through these three other billiard balls and out the other side. And the reason for that is something in thermodynamics called the law of conservation of energy. And that states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but simply transferred from one form to another. So as I mentioned with the kinetic energy transferring to potential energy, it has the same amount of energy, it's just changing forms. We can also do this experiment with two balls on each side by pulling them back, and you can see they kind of just bounce off each other. And that's because the energy in this system is being conserved and it's not being created, it's not being destroyed, it's simply transferring from one form to another. Now, I'm going to put this one away and actually have an experiment that you guys can try at home that I'll cover in the slides so you can see the exact task in a moment. But what I wanted to show this for was because of the transfer from, again, potential energy to kinetic energy. So as I take my board and make a ramp out of it with my stack of books here, I take my ping pong ball and bring it to the top of the ramp. Now what this is doing is relative to the top of the table, is loading it with potential energy because I had to do the work to lift it up here. And as I let it go and it rolls down to the bottom, that's actually transferring all to kinetic energy. So going back to our slideshow here, as I mentioned with the energy transfer, it can only be transferred from one form to another. It can't be created or destroyed. And that's a law of the conservation of energy in thermodynamics. So we talked about the relationship between mechanical, potential, and kinetic energy, and that mechanical is actually the sum of potential and kinetic energy. So as you can see here in this roller coaster, hopefully it's running nice and smoothly on your screens, but as the roller coaster car starts to move to the top of the hill, it's actually increasing in potential energy, and as it goes down the other side, the potential energy decreases while the kinetic energy increases because it's obviously picking up speed as it's going down the hill and through the loop. So you can try this experiment at home after we're done here with the 4-H at 4 with this ball and ramp. So what you'll need is a wood board or a book to act as a ramp, and then another set of books to act as something to put the end of your ramp on. You'll also need a small ball to be able to roll it, and then a tape measure. Because what you're going to do is you're going to raise the end of your ramp to 3 inches, up to 6 inches, and then up to 12 inches, and do an experiment where you release your ball from the top of the ramp and let it roll. So you're going to want to make sure that you have an area where your ball can roll instead of where I am on my kitchen counter where it'll roll off. So make sure you're on the floor or somewhere where it can roll. And then from the elevator to the end of the ramp, let it go. Once it stops, you measure how far it rolled, and then record it, and do that for each 3 inches, 6 inches, and 12 inches, and then make an estimate for if that ramp was at 18 inches high, and test it and see what happens. We're going to challenge you guys today to make a Rube Goldberg machine at home and ask you to share it with the hashtag FL4H at 4, and you can share your results with this experiment along with your Rube Goldberg machine. So speaking of Rube Goldberg machines, I have one that I built that we're going to watch it, see what happens, and then talk a little bit about the different types of energy that we saw while we're doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen again so you can hopefully see my video nice and clear on your screen. And my Rube Goldberg machine, hopefully you saw it in the background, is over here. So I have it called Mr. Matt's Super Duper Awesome Light Switch Machine. And what this light switch machine is going to do is actually turn on my kitchen lights. So you can see that they're off right now. And to do this, I have 4 steps in my Rube Goldberg machine. And it actually starts way back here with this cart and tape measure. Now, if you know anything about tape measures, if you've used them before, as you pull them out, they like to retract back. So I'm going to use that capability of the tape measure to have it pull the cart up this 2x4 over the lava pit of Lego Doom and to the end of the board. Now, as it gets to the end of the board, it's not actually going to trigger something. What is happening is when the cart is rolling up, you can see there is a pink string attached to it that runs all the way up this side of the 2x4 through this little Lego house that I built and around this hamster wheel. So the cart moving up is actually going to start the hamster wheel moving, and that's going to pull this pink string that goes by this Saturn V rocket, which is actually something that you could learn about at home. It's pretty cool. It's how we got our astronauts to the moon back in the 60s and 70s. But back to the Rube Goldberg machine, that string is going to release these 2 marbles to roll along this track to these dominoes, which are going to fall and then hit that billiard ball. It'll then roll off the end of the table, down into that towel there. And as you can see, there's a string attached to it that'll then turn on the light switch. I've tested this a couple of times, and so far it's worked every time I've done it. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So on the count of 3, I'm going to release the cart. So 3, 2, 1, up the ramp it goes. The hamster wheel is turning, and for some reason, my marbles didn't go. That's sometimes how this works. I'll go ahead and let the marbles roll. It hits the dominoes, and we've had 2 failures so far. Down goes the billiard ball, and on goes the lights. Well, I was really hoping it would run smoother than that for the live run. I did go ahead and record a video of it running smoothly so that you can see it, and I'll post that once this is over to our Clay County Facebook page and our Clay County Facebook page so that you guys can see it, and I'll also use the hashtag FL4H at 4. So let's talk a little bit about what different types of energy we might have seen in the Rube Goldberg machine I built. So if you could go ahead and type in the chat to Miss Grace Carter some of the types of energy that you saw, we can discuss them. So I'll give you about oh, 10 to 15 seconds to do that.
Hey, Matt, can you give us an example of what you are looking for when you say what types of energy have we seen?
All right, so yes, certainly. We talked about kinetic energy, which is objects moving. We talked about potential energy, specifically gravitational, where that's the object's energy based on its height above something. We talked about a little bit about elastic energy, which could be like a rubber band or a string. And we talked a little bit about chemical energy, which could be like a battery, or even fire would be chemical energy. And then we talked about mechanical energy, which is actually the sum of both of those. So this entire Rube Goldberg machine actually has mechanical energy, but it's made up of some different types of energy that we covered today. Does that help?
So we have one participant that has said they saw some potential energy with the ball falling from the gravity, and another participant who said they saw some kinetic energy as well.
Perfect. Those are two types of energy that are definitely in this Rube Goldberg machine. But there was one that was a little tricky that I was wondering if you guys might have caught. And that was actually in this tape measure. If you know a little bit about tape measures, as you pull them back, it acts a little bit like a spring. I don't know if you can see it in my video here. It doesn't look like you can, but as you pull it back and release it, it acts like a spring, and so it returns back to where it started. So obviously that would be the tape measure all wound up back inside the tape measure. So that was an example of elastic energy, elastic potential energy in that tape measure. And then, yes, you guys got it spot on with the kinetic energy with the balls rolling and moving, and then also the gravitational potential energy with the billiard ball at the end falling, and that's what turned on the lights. So Miss Beth now is going to talk a little bit about how to actually build a Rube Goldberg machine and some of the things that you might want to consider.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we are hoping that we're going to have a lot of participation building Rube Goldberg machines this week. The first step is to start at the end. Unlike when you read a book, when you start at the beginning and read to the last page, or when you're following a recipe and you start with step one and work all the way through the bottom of the recipe to make the cake, with a Rube Goldberg machine, we start at the end. We have to determine what task are we going to accomplish, what work is going to be done at the end of the project. So if you will, everyone please look down at the chat box, and I want you to send a chat to Grace that gives her some ideas of what kind of task you would like to do. You saw on my slide at the beginning, my task was to move a toy car. Matt, his task was to turn on a light. So there's all kinds of ideas. So we're going to be quiet for just a second, and you guys think of something that we should accomplish with our Rube Goldberg machine.
So far, we have a suggestion that someone wants to feed their cat with a Rube Goldberg machine.
That's great.
Another person is going to break a Lego wall down.
Excellent
And
idea.
a very ambitious person that wants to crack an egg in a pot. I feel like I would just make a giant mess with that. Someone else says lemonade maker juicer, pop a balloon. These are great suggestions. Someone says we could send a car down a ramp. We could turn a fan on.
Okay, those are fantastic suggestions. Thanks, Grace, for telling us what the kids are writing. Now, Matt's going to take some of these ideas and put them into a poll for us. And oh, he already has it. Fantastic. If everyone would look right there at the poll, go ahead and enter your choice. What would you like to do? Everyone in that's watching, please select something.
So far, Papa Balloon is winning. Actually, it's Feeding Our Pet is tied with Papa Balloon right now with only 2 votes. So I know there are 18 people on here, and I don't think 18 people have voted yet. So go ahead and vote in there, and we'll see what we come up with. We've got 10 of the 14 participants that aren't a host on here. So I know there's 14 of you out there that can vote. If you should have had the poll pop right up once I launched it. So we'll give maybe about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's go ahead and end the polling and share the results. So hopefully you can see Pop a Balloon has won our polling, slightly beating out Feed Our Pet. So I think the task that we're going to challenge everybody to do is build a Rube Goldberg machine that will feed your pet, whether that's a cat, dog, fish, whatever it is.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So we started at the end. We selected our task first, our simple task. What are we going to do? And then the next step, step 2, Matt, is to make a plan. So we're going to need a minimum of 4 steps for this project. And we also want you to include a 4-leaf clover to represent 4-H somewhere in your design. It's a really good idea to get your parents, your guardians, your brothers and sisters, get your family in on this. Make it a family project. And while you're working together, brainstorm ideas, design, sketch out your plan first, kind of on paper, make a list of what you think you need, brainstorm some ideas of what kinds of steps you want to include. And then, next slide, you're going to go gather your materials. Now there's some sample materials here, marbles, Legos, cars, pulleys, there's all kinds of things that you might want to select. So quickly go to your chat box and give me an idea of something that's in your house, your room, your garage, that you might like to use in a Rube Goldberg project. And then Grace will tell us what some of the answers are. So send your message to Grace.
I'm hearing wood, a mouse trap. Someone says their brother, Legos.
Oh, very good.
A soccer ball, a whisk, magnets.
Those are some excellent ideas. So when you go to gather your materials, I do want to encourage you to be sure and ask before you take something out of your brother's closet, or you take a pan or one of your mom's kitchen utensils from the kitchen, because you might actually need to use it for several days. So make sure you go and you ask if the item belongs to someone else, if you can borrow it for 2 or 3 days to build your project. Next slide, Matt. Okay, so step 4, we've come up with our simple task. We've brainstormed and designed our ideas. We've gathered some materials. Now it's time to build. Now, building it can take a little bit of work and effort on your part, because you're going to have to build each step, step by step. And sometimes things don't work the first or second or third time. Sometimes you might actually need to move one step from one position and put it somewhere else. So it's going to take a lot of practice. Now, how do you know when you're ready to video your Rube Goldberg project? Well, when you can run your machine from start to finish, when you can make the first step, whether it's touching the domino or releasing the tape measure, when you can start that first step and watch it run all the way to the end without having to intervene, it's definitely time to start videoing. And as you saw today, it's not always perfect. So the wonderful thing about the video is that you can film it again and again until you get it perfectly right. Now, what are you going to do with these videos? You're going to upload your video to your favorite social media site using the hashtag Florida4H@4. We want you to submit your video by Tuesday, March 31st. And then Matt and I are going to look for them. We're going to enjoy watching all the great things that you and your family and your guardians and brothers and sisters and everyone in your home put together. So try to make this a family project. If no one's interested, that's okay too. We want you to do it all by yourself if you want. Sometimes that's fun too. Okay, next slide, Matt. Safety and respect. All right, back to some housekeeping ideas. I already mentioned ask permission before you borrow items that don't belong to you. That's kind of important. The next one is seek help from a parent or guardian or an adult with difficult tasks, some of those hot glue guns that are really, really hot, or when using sharp objects for cutting. Be thoughtful about your surroundings. Okay, guys, this project has lots of energy. It's got potential energy, kinetic energy, mechanical energy involving both. Let's not leave any permanent marks on the floors, holes in the walls, damage to the furniture, or another person. So make sure you know where projectiles are going to land before you launch them with your machine. Ask your parent or guardian for permission to publish your video. Make sure that they approve of the social media that you've selected and that they are okay with you publishing that video. And then one other thing about the video, this is really important. Remember that everything seen by your camera in your video, once you publish it, will be seen by everyone that views your video. So make sure that all the surroundings around your Rube Goldberg projects are things that are okay to show. You know, if you got a stack of laundry there, you may not want everybody to see, you know, the underwear, the t-shirts, and the socks. If you do, that's okay. But if not, move everything around, move it out of the way so that we only see your video. Now, let's go to Matt and see what kinds of questions you'll have.
Well, before we get to time for questions, I did want to make sure to point out some things with my Rube Goldberg machine. So in case you were worried about me having to use a lot of tools to build it, there are only two things that I used in terms of tools to build this. And that was just a plain old Phillips head screwdriver and then a drill with a small drill bit. So both of these you probably have around your house. This one, the screwdriver, you should be able to use without your parents having to watch over you. But with the drill, make sure that you ask your parents' permission and that you get their help so that way you are being safe. So I didn't need very many tools to build this. Those were the only two I needed. And then Ms. Beth mentioned about how to start from the end. So hopefully you can see here how I put together my task list. So you can see up here at the top, I said my task was to turn on a light. And then I went from reverse order the steps all the way down to the beginning to put together the plan for my Rube Goldberg machine. Now I didn't know exactly how it was going to work step by step. I just knew the general idea of what I wanted it to do. So that way I could sit there and tinker with it and finally get it to work just right. And then for videoing the Rube Goldberg machine, I'm going to post it with the hashtag FL4H4. And all I used was my regular smartphone cell phone. And I did go a little bit old school and used a selfie stick to film myself when I was talking. So if you happen to have a selfie stick, you know, one of those old school things, you could use that to help your video. And so that's really all I did to put together mine. A lot of simple things that you should have around the house and have access to. Now, before we sign off today, I would like to ask if you guys have any questions. Did you sit through our presentation today and now you're thinking, I am completely lost and confused and don't know anything about what we just learned and I don't even know where to start? So if you have any of those questions, please feel free to type them into the chat to Miss Grace Carter, and we will spend a couple minutes answering questions if there are any, and then sign off. We do have an exit poll that I would really appreciate it if you could fill out before you leave. It just asks a couple simple questions about what types of energy we learned about today, if you're able to recognize them, and then just a little bit of information about yourself, if you live in Florida or outside Florida, just a little bit of information so that we can know who was on here today. It is all anonymous, so I won't be able to track it back to any individual person. So please, if you could do that for us, it would be a real help. So Miss Grace, do we have any questions?
We have a question asking, can my dog be used as mechanical or kinetic energy?
Well, if you can get your dog to cooperate, that could certainly be used in your Rube Goldberg machine. Like I said, if your dog is going to cooperate with you and do what it needs to do when it's signaled by the Rube Goldberg machine. I could certainly try to use my dog Nala, but she has a tendency to wander off halfway through when I'm trying to do something. So it really wouldn't have worked for me. Any other questions out there?
So Matt, just to reinforce, we're going to build at least a 4-step machine that will feed a pet.
Let me go back and check the polling if I can. All right. I don't want to close those. All right, so I can't seem to see the poll results once I close it. So it was one of our co-hosts making sure to pay attention out there. I believe it was Feed a Pet, correct? Now I'm questioning myself if it was Papa Balloon. Anybody have any thoughts out there and was paying attention when I showed the results poll?
Okay, well, Matt looks for that. We're going to do at least 4 steps. It can be more, but at least 4 steps. And we're going to make sure there's a clover, a 4-leaf clover in there somewhere. And our deadline is Tuesday evening, the 31st. And then make sure that you, when you post it to social media, you post it to hashtag Florida4H@4 so that we can all see the great results and look at the Rube Goldberg projects.
Grace was nice enough to remind me that it was Feed a Pet, because now that I think about it, I remember talking about how we could feed our cat, our dog, our fish. Even if we're raising an animal in 4-H, we could build a Rube Goldberg machine to feed that. I know a lot of fairs happened recently, so you may not have your animals that you raise for 4-H anymore, but we're going to go with the task to feed a pet.
And if you don't have a pet, that's perfectly okay. You can still do a Rube Goldberg project with that type of action at the end as if you were feeding a dog, a cat, a fish, or a bird.
Well, that is all we have for you guys today. I hope that you enjoyed our presentation about Rube Goldberg machines and a little bit about physics. As I mentioned, I launched the exit poll, so you should be seeing it. Please feel free to answer some of those questions before you sign off. And if you, when you make your Rube Goldberg machine and record it with your cell phone, make sure to upload it to your favorite social media, whether that's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, or even just plain old YouTube. Use the hashtag FL4H@4, and that's spelling it out AT instead of the @ sign. So it should look a little bit like FL4H@4, but it's really FL4H@4. So if you don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting at 4:45, which is in 3 minutes. So you can get some last questions into Miss Grace and I can answer them. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and shut down the meeting in 3 minutes. Thanks for coming and participating.
Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks, Matt.